Choice, your creative superpower. We have the power to manifest as we dedicate attention to our thoughts, but often miss opportunity to achieve the greatest good. Your superpower is waiting to be unleashed to unlock a fuller, more rewarding world for all. Join us every Thursday at noon Mountain Time for Choice, your creative superpower with Zoe Muro. And now, here's Zoe.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the New Thought Media Network. My name is Zoe Muro, and I am honored to be your host for Choice, your creative superpower. During our time together each week, we'll be examining ways for you to wield your superpower for your greatest good. If you're coming back, it's good to see you again. And if this is your first time, welcome to the show. I'm a religious science practitioner here at the Oakland Center for Spiritual Living in Northern California. And I'm also a transformational coach. I assist people in living their lives as fully as possible. Excuse me. Hello, Wayne. Good to see you again. Always good to have you here. So, folks, today in episode 7, we'll be exploring the topic of addiction and how that relates to choice. Some of the topics I've chosen for this show have been, let's say, a little more lighthearted than others. This falls into the others category, I think. But that doesn't mean it's depressing or dark, quite the opposite, because I'm here to tell you that even when we are faced with as formidable a force as addiction, we still can wield our superpower, and to great advantage. Is addiction a disease, or is it a chosen behavior? Might seem like an odd question, given that the way we typically think of addiction is something where we do not have a choice at all. We're driven by an all-encompassing urge to use a substance or participate in a behavior. Considering that the term has been around, the term addiction, that is, has been around since like the 1500s, you'd think we'd have a clear definition and understanding of it by now. But it's not quite that simple. Now, it's interesting. The very fact that people can actually step away from their addiction and live free and fulfilling lives without giving in to the object of the addiction is the biggest complicating factor in defining and understanding what addiction is. So, as we always seem to do in these discussions, it's time to put a stake in the ground, take a stand, and this is where I'm going to land on this. Yes, addiction is real. Yes, it can destroy lives. No, it is not something people simply choose. Yeah, I woke up one morning and said, gee, I think I'll be an addict. Yeah. And yes, it is something that can be addressed through conscious choice. So as contradictory as that might seem, that's where I take my stand. And actually, that's where the vast majority of people and organizations working with addiction apparently take their stand as well. Or there wouldn't be step groups, for example, like NA or OA, nor would there be rehabs. As the centuries rolled by, attitudes about addiction became tied to prevailing philosophies and cultural norms. So initially, I suppose that someone who could not control themselves and was drawn to a given substance might be considered to be possessed. All right. As we got a little more sophisticated, we might have seen it as a moral failing, or then eventually as a disease. But each of these attitudes and each of these perspectives inform and shape the solutions that people believe to be appropriate. So clearly, the philosophy of science of mind embraces the principle that we are co-creators of our life experience. So choice must be a part of the solution. And I can tell you that from where I sit today, as opposed to some 40 plus years ago, I see things very differently. When I was in the pit, if you will, completely at the mercy of my addictions, I took a certain solace from the idea of addiction as a disease. Because then I wasn't responsible. I wasn't culpable. I couldn't help myself. I have a disease. Well, at least the last part of that was all true. I couldn't help myself. Couldn't help myself. But I did recognize that I wanted help. I wanted an out. And I chose to either find that help or accept that I was going to die. That was as much as I was able to consider at that particular point in my life. But once I chose to find help, things changed dramatically for me because I suddenly had more opportunities to choose. Now, don't get me wrong. I really wasn't too happy to have choices at that point in my life because it felt like if I was going to take the addiction away, my life was going to be one endless nightmare because I didn't understand the difference between taking away the addiction and taking away the pain of the addiction. But I remember standing at my window. I had the blinds closed. Everything was like dark and just so tight because I was convinced the sunlight was going to burn me up like I was some sort of boozed up and drugged up vampire. And I realized the way I was going, I was either going to die quickly or slowly, but if I didn't do something, I was going to die. And so far, all of the choices that I had made just felt like pain. But the alcohol and the drugs weren't helping anymore. So I figured I had nothing to lose by choosing to attempt to rid myself of alcohol and drugs. So that one half-hearted, doubt-filled, bleak as can be choice led to more and more choices, each developing more hope, less pain. Anyone who is dealing with addiction, who believes that somehow, somewhere, in some way, there is even the slightest possibility of getting out from under that addiction, they have made a choice that can save them. Even if they can't, at this point, say, I'm ready to stop this cycle, if they are willing to say no more than, I'm willing to be ready to stop, there's hope. There's hope. Once that initial choice has been made, a person dealing with addiction has opened the door to a new life. But there are no guarantees that simply stopping substance use or stopping some addictive behavior is going to result in recovery. So depending on the type of addiction, there could be a different set of choices that would need to be made. For example, if the substance that is being used is alcohol or drugs, choosing to refrain from use, obvious choice. And one that must be made continually until such time as changes can take place in your blood chemistry and in your thought patterns. Yeah. And Wayne, you're absolutely right. It is about embracing the new, right? Finding something that is quite different from what we had been doing. once I have taken my addiction and put it aside, as I said, things can change in my blood chemistry, things can change in my thought patterns. What if the substance is food? Simply can't stop eating. In 12-step programs, there's a phrase, one day at a time. It's a very common way to refer to the choice that a person dealing with addiction makes each day to stay with the program, because all you're given is that day. And if you look ahead, we've spoken many times about the dangers of that projection and not being in the now. But if you're always looking ahead and you're saying, oh, well, I've got to do this the rest of my life, it's quite daunting. Do it today. Do it today. So if you have a food addiction, you're not just making a choice each and every day, you're actually making a choice each and every time you eat, each and every time that you drink, because moderation can be far more challenging than abstinence. I have quite a few friends who have dealt with food addictions very, very successfully. It absolutely can be done. And my heart goes out to them because, as I said, moderation is most certainly more difficult than abstinence. Another key choice that a person who is dealing with addiction faces is how they view their circumstances. What I mean by that is, do they choose to see themselves as being victimized by a disease? If they do, there's a greater possibility that they will struggle significantly more than if they're able to see that their circumstance need not define them, need not define their life. When you get right down to it, isn't that true of all conditions, all circumstances? All right. Because addiction is such a huge, huge thing, sometimes we give it more power than it actually needs, than it actually could possibly have. So recognizing that it is indeed a circumstance, a condition of this human life, we know we have choices that we can make. If we do choose to follow a program of recovery for a long enough period of time, excuse me, then our bodies and our minds have an opportunity to reset. That's the focus that you'll see in the suggestion that you do things like 90 meetings in 90 days. It's a very common thing among 12-step programs. It allows the person who's seeking a solution to heal not only the physical ravages of addiction, but the emotional and the spiritual ones as well. Now, you might have noticed that I'm using the word addiction, but I've been shying away from the word addict. That's a very deliberate choice right now. For me, personally, given the amount of time that I have been clean and sober, which is somewhere in excess of, let me see, 40 years, I see myself as someone who recognizes the danger of addiction. I am someone who I have established a way of life that excludes these substances that nearly killed me. And I've replaced all of that time and energy that was expended seeking oblivion with an ever-expanding search for enlightenment. A much better way to spend my time, better way to spend my energy. But when I was newly sober, it was very important in terms of my recovery to identify myself as an addict, because I had yet to establish any other way to look at my life. I was reeling from the damage that alcohol and drugs had brought, and I needed to absolutely know, without a doubt, that I was an addict, as much as I tried to ignore that. With time, with determination, with grace, with love, I was able to see my truth more clearly. So as addiction's hold begins to loosen, it's not uncommon to find that there's more choices to be made than you might have even imagined. Because addiction has a tendency to obscure a multitude of problem areas in one's life. In fact, the choice points, remember I talk about choice points as being times in your life when you're aware that you have a choice to make, or you realize you have made a choice. Well, these choice points that now present themselves, well, frankly, they can be overwhelming to a person in recovery. These are choices that have been avoided. These have been areas that we didn't even recognize that there was choice because we're far too busy dealing with our addiction. Choices around relationships, finances, work, physical health, emotional, mental health. All of these and more are possibilities. What needs to guide the choices at this point becomes of paramount importance to the success of the person in recovery. If the person addresses their choices out of guilt, out of shame, it's going to bring about a profoundly different result than approaching them with self-compassion and a desire to progress, not to remain mired in past transgressions. Think back to our discussion of forgiveness. And if you missed that one, that was episode 3. Remember, self-forgiveness can provide a tremendous benefit. And it's most certainly not the same as sweeping things under the rug or dodging responsibility for one's actions. No, not by a long shot. By choosing to address the various factors in our lives which addiction masked, the net result is often the ability to uproot the very reasons that the addiction was so powerful in the first place. Put it another way, the darker our secrets, the more we want to forget them, to hide from them, all of which can make addiction's pull all the more powerful. Remember, anything that we do because in some way, shape, or form, we believe that there's a benefit to it. We are often wrong, but we believe that there's something there. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. And addiction always wants you to believe that there is something there. There is a reason why you need to continue using. You need to continue that behavior. This is why recovering or healing from addiction can be really daunting. And in my studied opinion, it's the reason why so many people fail to recover. Just as they're starting to feel better by not abusing their bodies or their minds through their addictions, now the pain of all they have been unable or unwilling to address comes screaming into their lives. And it is so very tempting to seek out the familiar comfort of the addiction. Even when there's nothing comfortable about the actual addiction itself. See, in times of stress, it's very common for us to revert to our typical patterns and behaviors. Our brains are literally wired to do that. Excuse me. This is why people in recovery are often advised to avoid people, places, and things that trigger their addictive response. And I understand it's not always possible, but when it is, it can literally be a life-saving choice. Given how addiction prefers to be in the driver's seat, it becomes important when we make choices about our recovery or our healing to consider the choices in light of recovery. In other words, if I make this choice, will that move me towards recovery or towards backsliding into addictive behavior? Brings up another important point: the company you keep. There's an expression I really like that goes, play the cards you're dealt, but choose who is at the table. I have attended hundreds and hundreds of recovery meetings over the past 40 years. And it was fascinating, although at times it was somewhat disturbing, to see how people would align themselves with folks who could either lift them up, or they aligned themselves with folks who essentially were perfectly content to wallow where they were in the mud and the muck. I want to repeat this quote from an earlier episode because it works really importantly here. This is from the book, What Doesn't Kill Us? Exploring Post-Traumatic Growth, which is absolutely what a person recovering from addiction is going through or could go through. So Stephen Joseph is the man's name. He writes, "Not until adversity strikes do many people begin to look deeply within themselves to reappraise what really matters. Adversity can awaken people to new and more meaningful lives." When I first approached recovery, all I wanted, to be perfectly honest, was to figure out how to drink and drug successfully so I could avoid trouble with friends, avoid trouble with family, and avoid trouble with the law. But the longer I stayed sober, the more expansive my choices became. I started to prize the feeling of being in control of an aspect of my life that had controlled me for so many years. So I chose, and this is a choice every person in recovery will face, I chose to live, not merely to not die. And again, more choices became possible. When I went into recovery, I was 6'2", still am, and I weighed 130 pounds, 130. That's not very much, folks, for a 6'2" man. I chose to return to a doctor who had predicted I'd be dead by 30. I had to apologize to him first because on my 30th birthday, he had told me that I wouldn't live to be 30. So on my 30th birthday, I called him, I cursed him out, and I yelled at him. I said, "Ha, I'm still alive. Ha." All right, so needed to apologize for that. And then I asked him for his help. And he got me started on a physical fitness regimen, which led me to find ways to improve my nutrition, my sleep, so many different aspects of my life. Now, remember the people, places, and things advisory I mentioned. So I started to make choices based on whether or not my sobriety would be supported or challenged by the people I spent my time with, the places I went, the things that I did. And I've got to tell you, there were people who were hell-bent on getting me to use again because as far as they were concerned, that wasn't fun anymore. And there were places that became synonymous with addiction for me. There were certain clubs and certain parties, certain parts of town. These are things that prompted me to continue to addictive behavior, like smoking cigarettes, for example. So that had to stop. Choice by choice, my resolve to recover, to heal, became stronger, as did my body, my mind, and my connection to spirit. On the positive side of people, places, and things were the choices I made that added rather than subtracted, meaning I chose to go into therapy. I chose to get a sponsor. I was adding people who supported my recovery, people who knew me as a person in recovery. I chose to spend more time outdoors, or at least outside of my apartment, with the blinds drawn and the lights out. I chose to spend time with people who were clearly enjoying life without the need for a shot of liquid courage or a snort of this or that, just to take the edge off. I didn't know it at the time, but I was finally becoming a co-creator of my life experience. So regardless of the type of addiction, substance-related or behavior-related, another choice that is a predictor of success is the choice to examine and modify one's behavior. I'll give you a simple example. You're going to sit down and watch a TV show. So you grab something to drink, you grab a bag of chips, munch on, and away you go, mindlessly munching on that bag, which mysteriously becomes quite empty, and you barely even tasted the chips. By connecting these activities, getting the drink, getting the chips, watching the show, they become a familiar, very comfortable, and difficult pattern to break. It becomes a habit. If you wanted to ensure that you're not overeating, you need to change that pattern. You need to recognize maybe you don't need the bag of chips. Maybe a small bowl or a handful would suffice. Maybe no snack at all would be reasonable some of the time. You need to determine which actions are really conscious choices and which are pre-programmed responses. Add in enough pre-programmed responses, remove discernment, you're heading down a path that can be problematic, what people refer to as the slippery slope. As is the case for any client I work with who's looking for a change in behavior, it becomes all the more important for the person in recovery to choose effective coping strategies for those times when addiction's pull becomes dangerously strong, as it likely will at times. People sometimes think that they only have to be concerned when they're in times of stress or distress. And it's like, no, even times of celebration, times of joy can be something to watch out for, because there could be a certain feeling of invulnerability or a feeling that I deserve to celebrate in a particular way. So having a plan that allows you to choose an alternative that can actually be employed with confidence becomes paramount. So just as we see, as we pursue our spiritual path, that not every reading or meditation or affirmation works under all circumstances, same applies here. We don't simply give up. No, we grab a different tool from our spiritual toolbox. We call a prayer partner, a practitioner, or a minister. We make a choice to better our situation by aligning with our truth. And if you're in recovery, folks, you want your truth. And your truth is never going to be found in addiction. If you're struggling with addiction in any form, please don't hesitate to seek help. A quick search on the internet, and you can find many, many organizations that can provide free counseling. Most importantly, rest assured, you need not do this alone. If you'd be willing to share with me how you're choosing to address addiction, please feel free to email me at zodimiro@gmail.com. Rest assured, while my life is an open book, any interactions you have with me will always be kept in complete confidence. And if there's a topic relating to choice that you would like to see me address in a future episode, by all means, let me know. Folks, I truly appreciate your spending time with me this week. And I hope that you have time to explore all that the New Thought Media Network has to offer. I'm running out of time here. I just want to quickly tell you that 12 noon Pacific time, that's 1 p.m. Mountain time, check out Finding the Joy in the Journey with practitioner and soon-to-be minister Gina Calvario Krupka. And then at 1 p.m. Pacific time, that's 2 p.m. Mountain, the Vibrant Living Hour with practitioner Ken Ludwig. Anything that you can do, folks, to ensure that you are on your path, ensure that you are aligning with your truth, it's a wonderful thing. So until we meet again, choose wisely, much love, and many, many blessings. Namaste.